Okay, so now we're going to talk about what are the basic components of life as we know it. So I want to start off by telling you about the genome, because that's where we're focused particularly, and then I'm going to tell you how we go from the genome to you. And so I'm going to tell you a little bit about the process that cells actually function all the time while we're talking here. This is going on inside your body in every single cell. So the first thing is your instruction set is written down in DNA, which, as we've said before, is a sequence of 4 nucleotide bases, A, C, G, and T. And that string of letters, in your case 3 billion long, contains the instruction set for you. Now, I want to use an analogy. And so the analogy is this. Let's suppose that you have a building, and you want to know the plans for the entire building, everything from the ground up. Okay? So you might have a huge book of plans that describes everything that's in the building, the bricks, the mortar, the electrical system, the plumbing system, everything, the alarm systems, you name it, it's all there. Okay? Now let's suppose that you need to fix something that's wrong with the electricity in one particular room in the building. So you call in the electrician, and the electrician wants to know, do you have the plans for the building? So you may give her the entire instruction set for the entire building, and she's going to say, well, I don't need all of this. I mean, who cares about the plumbing on the 17th floor? I don't need that. I'm just trying to fix the electrical circuits on the 3rd floor. So what she's going to do is she's going to Xerox off, copy off a couple of pages of the plans just for the specific room that she's got to fix, and then she'll work with that rather than lugging the whole thing around. So obviously much more sensible, and biology does the same thing too. So think of the DNA, your genome, as being like the big book of instructions, the big plans for the entire building. And now think of the analogy of fixing the electrical circuit in a particular room as being the problem of building a particular protein that does one particular small task inside the cell. Okay? You don't need the whole plans for everything just to make that protein. You just need a small part of it. And so the copying machine in biology is done using a process called transcription. And in transcription, what happens is a molecular machine reads the DNA, finds the gene that codes for this particular protein, and just reads that and produces a transcript. And the transcript is called messenger RNA. It's a terrible name, but that's what it was called, mRNA. Why does life use DNA and why does it use RNA? What's the difference between them? So the analogy that I'd like to use is that the DNA is like the hard drive in your computer. So the DNA is very stable, and it can be transferred easily from one generation to another. The RNA is less stable, and I want you to think of that as being more like flash memory or RAM in your computer. You can create it on the fly, it's used for a while, and then when it's no longer needed, it's sort of flushed away like that. So the DNA is sort of long-term memory. The RNA, the mRNA, and other forms of RNA inside a cell are more short-term memory. Now, mRNA is also a polymer. It's also built out of nucleotide bases. They're basically the A, C, and G that you have, we've met before, but instead of T, it's called U. It's not really important why, but it's a slightly different chemical than T, but in the mRNA transcript, it's A, C, G, and U. And then that transcript, or whilst it's being produced, at least in bacteria and archaea, is simultaneously being translated by the ribosome, the machine we've talked about before, into the actual proteins themselves. So what actually is a protein? So if you went to an elementary chemistry class, you probably learned about the periodic table. So you learned about atoms, which are basically round blobby things, and then you learned about molecules, which are little groups of round blobby things put together. It's kind of like a bunch of grapes, let's say. And but then what proteins are and what are the molecules of life? They're mostly not blobs. They're mostly long stringy objects called polymers. You take some repeat unit, some molecule, and then you make many, many copies of that and string them together to form something that's more like spaghetti than a blobby thing. And most of the molecules of life turn out to be spaghetti-like. They're polymers. But they're not always the same as you go along them. In other words, it's not always the same sequence that's repeated. The sequences are varied, and it's that variation that is used by biology to encode genetic information. So proteins are polymers, and polymers are the same long, stringy, spaghetti-like objects that are used to make plastics and rubber and things like this. So why are proteins important? Well, it's very simple. You are mostly proteins. The proteins are the bricks and mortar of organisms, and they are the output of the process of gene expression. So that's why we're fundamentally interested in proteins. And at the IEGB, we study, when we study genomics, we study in particular what proteins are being expressed in a cell at a particular point in its life cycle or whatever it's doing and so on, because that tells us how it is working. So proteins are fundamentally important for life.